Well, let's see, what was the first?
Your
Just my name.
Yeah,
Jones, is it Smith? No, my name is Farris Hotchkiss. I'm in the class in 1958, so it was the 1956 mock convention that I was active with, and I was active with it because I was the president of what in those days was called the Student Service Society. We were kind of like ushers, and that was my job insofar as the actual convention was concerned.
Were you a member of a state delegation at all?
No, I wasn't. No, for no particularly good reason, but I had to find a number of volunteers to put on these armbands to serve as Student Service Society people, and that was what in those days seemed time consuming. Now, of course, looking back on it, it wasn't all that time consuming, so that was my sole role.
Right. So you were present, obviously, for the Alvin Barkley events.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going to run through that just quickly. What time of year was that? Was it hot over there?
Yes, it was hot in there. It was in the, I'm not sure, I don't remember if it was a spring. I think it was a spring, but it was very hot. And Doremus Gymnasium, as you probably know, is not one that was built for comfort. And we were very crowded. And Vice President Barkley, I think, to a certain extent, was suffering from heat. He had been in this parade that was also hot in an open convertible. He was certainly not a young man, and everyone in Doremus, I think, was feeling a bit claustrophobic because every square inch of that auditorium or that gymnasium was taken up. For instance, my parents had come for the mock convention, and a lot of the parents of other students came. So there were not only students and faculty there, but there were families or just Lexingtonians. It was open to anyone who showed up.
Were there bleachers back then along the walls, or?
No, we had folding wooden chairs that you put on the basketball floor. Mm-hmm. And there was a dais set up for the main people, Hardin Marion being one of them, who was, I think Hardin was secretary, perhaps, of the mock convention. But generally speaking, the seating, if you were down on the floor, was in these folding wooden chairs. Then there were more of those folding wooden chairs on the track that goes around. And that's where I was. I happened to be literally right smack over Alvin Barkley's head, not really by design, more just by happenstance.
How do you remember the moments that happened? What are your memories of his speech?
Well, my memories of his speech were really, frankly, more long-lasting than I thought they would be, if I had even thought about it. But he was an old-time orator. In those days, Washington Lee had a president named Francis Pendleton Gaines, who also was an old-fashioned orator. And so we as students perhaps had paid a little more attention to that style of speech making than otherwise. And so Barkley immediately sort of was a comfortable and welcome stylistic speaker. And as you probably know, he was asked by the people there in an entirely unrealistic urging to think about running himself, and which was silly, but you do silly things. And he reacted to that by saying, no, I don't know if he said I'm much too old, but then he said, it is a bit sometimes like the fire horse or the fire dog. I guess it was a fire dog when he hears the clang of the bell, you know, he wants to go. And the students said, yeah, you know, we want you to do that, you know, come on, Alvin, that kind of thing. And then he said his fateful and famous words, which were paraphrased from the Bible, when he said, I would rather be a servant in the house of the Lord than to sit in the seats of the mighty. And with that, he dropped dead. And it was sort of unbelievable that he did that. And although no one could long have thought that he had just fainted, because he just hit the floor with not an inconsequential weight. He was not a terribly big man, but he was rather portly. And of course, in those days, you didn't have the kind of first responders that we have today, you know. And the gymnasium today has those heart defibrillators that probably would have been used. He wasn't even given, as I recall, mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Not that probably that would have done any good. And one of the memories that I had of that episode was that one of our students came very close to Vice President Barkley when he was lying down and took a picture of him in, as I recall, one of the relatively old-fashioned kind of cameras that had a flash bulb. And the state police didn't want that picture to be taken. And so there was a real tussle for that camera, which the state police, as I recall, did take possession of. And again, if you can imagine the press putting up with that today.
So from your vantage point, you would have seen the reaction of the audience.
Oh, it was just, you could hear a pin drop. I mean, that gymnasium was, as I said, packed and jammed and loud, but there was not a sound for quite a while. It seemed like probably a lot longer than it really was. But there was, the reaction was complete shock and awe. And I think immediately, just right away, I think people put together the fact that this man had just died and what he had just said. And I think that the two were taken together in a very dramatic sort of way.
He knew, maybe he felt it was coming.
Yeah, or whatever.
So then, I know you were a beta. I was beta sweetheart in college. So.
Great, there you are.
So did y'all go back to the fraternity house and continue life as normal, or was it strange? Was it?
No, just as far as I was concerned, personally, as I said, my parents had come up. We lived in Richmond. They'd come up for the mock convention. They were staying at the Robert E. Lee Hotel on Main Street, so I went back with them initially to their room. And I am not going to be absolutely sure of this, but I think that very quickly it was announced that the mock convention would reconvene the 2 days hence, I believe. And that was largely influenced by Mrs. Barkley's or the family's wish that we not abandon what we were doing. And as I recall, and maybe faulty memory, there was a day in between, but on the second day we reconvened in the gymnasium and picked up where we had left off and moved along.
Do you, you might not be able to speak to this, but according to the research I was handed, before the 1950s, the mock convention was more of just kind of like a fun party. And in the 50s is when the meticulous research began, and as a result, the tradition of accurate predictions began. Now, of course, Luke John told me that really the reputation for accuracy began in 1926. 6, I think he said. But do you know anything about that, how the MockCon shifted, or why it shifted, or?
Well, what I know about how and why it shifted was the decision that it should be much more faithful to the way a convention, a real convention, is conducted. Of course, I wasn't here, but my impression is that before the Second World War, mainly it was kind of a straw vote. I mean, it was mainly just people who's for Alvin Barkley, raise your hands, and so on and so forth. Whereas after the Second World War, the attitude and the intention was changed to making it as much a mirror image of the real political conventions as we could. I am not a student of that of conventions and that sort of thing before the Second World War, but a lot of them, as you may know, were not attended even by the candidates. So the whole thing was very, very different. And but by the time I came along, that would have been only the second mock convention after that was reestablished. I think I'm right about that.
Okay, so after your student years here, you came back to the university and worked in several capacities. Can you just outline for us what those were?
Well, the different jobs I had at Washington Lee began as the director of student financial aid and the director of placement. That was the job that that Lou John had vacated for the 2 years that he was going to spend working on his PhD. Not quite at the end, before the end of those 2 years went by, Bob Huntley became the president of Washington Lee, and we didn't at that time have what today would be called a modern development fundraising function here. We had the Alumni Association, and every year they made 1 or 2 or 3 mailings to alumni to support what was called the Alumni Fund. So Bob asked me if I would take on that job, because before coming back to W&L, I'd been in sales and marketing for McCall Corporation. I didn't know really anything much about fundraising, but there's a similarity between marketing and sales and fundraising. So I did, and we began very modestly. Frank Parsons, who you may have talked to, Frank Parsons and I really were it, just the two of us. Before too much longer, though, Frank was asked by Bob Huntley to veer away from development work per se and pay more attention to physical planning and facilities development, and that, I mean, development, but not necessarily fundraising development. And so from there I began putting together what I thought was the right way to raise money on what we call an outright basis. And then over the years I became the director of development. That was the terminology back then. And then in John Wilson's presidency, I became the vice president for what then we called university relations, which was putting fundraising, alumni administration, and communications together as in one pool. And I continued in that way until I became secretary of the Board of Trustees and assistant to the president and vice president of university relations. I did those 3 things for a while.
In all of these various roles, how did the mock convention play into that? Is that something like in development? would it be an attraction for someone to want to give money? I mean, it's outside of funding the mock convention itself, but just because of its existence, is that attractive to people?
I don't know, in asking about the effect that a convention would have to encourage philanthropy, I think beyond funding the convention itself, I can't remember any specific example. Now, having said that, you'd never know. I mean, certainly the mock convention was part of Washington and Lee's reputation, and to the degree it had been so accurate and so much fun, I'm sure that it had an effect on those who were students in those days to remember Washington and Lee more lovingly and generously as in their philanthropic plans as they grew older. But I can't remember a specific tie between the two.
How does the budget work for the mock convention? Where does the money come from? Is it all raised by students? Does development help with that?
Well, yes. In trying to assist the convention fund itself, and that's the intention, is that the convention funds itself. In other words, the convention, at least not in my days, unless it's changed, is not a drawdown from the university's tuition, as an example. But each state committee is responsible in raising money from their state to pay for the activities that they plan to undertake, as is the case pretty much in the real convention. And that's how it's done almost entirely. Now, it may be that at the very beginning of the mock convention activity, say like when it's 2 or 3 years, let's say, before the actual convention, there may be some funding from the university per se that is not raised by the students, although I don't recall being involved professionally in terms of our development operation and raising money for the mock convention.
So it's because it's student run.
Yeah, I mean, students would come by and we'd certainly sit and talk, and by then there was a development staff, and we would, sort of plan with them and help them where we thought they could be a little sort of oriented differently in what they intended. But by and large, it's sort of on-the-job training, and they did a year after year after year a remarkable job in doing that.
Do you think that the skills that they learn doing that sort of thing is, as part of the teaching process of W&L, really, the skills that they learn running the mock convention will further them in their careers?
Well, I think the skills they learned undoubtedly would have had a bearing on their careers, perhaps subliminally, perhaps not in any concrete way. But Washington Lee sends out into the world a lot of students who are very politically active even before they graduate and make very successful careers of themselves in the political arena.
What do you think is the value of the mock convention? Is there a specific value to it?
Yes, I think the value of the mock convention to begin with is the convention itself. I don't think the American public is all that well educated as to how conventions work. Now, sure, they can turn on television and see the activity, which, as doesn't tell you much about what's making or what has caused that activity to work, how that activity is being supported financially, and how it's working politically, and that sort of thing. So I think it educates them in that respect. I think it also makes them, at least during that period, more aware of the this country's political activity as a whole, not just the convention, but and they pay attention to platforms. I don't think many people pay any attention to platforms, but they have to write them. They have to put them together. So I think that too would be an unusual experience and skill that would come out of it.
Have you attended other mock conventions?
Yeah, since I've been living back here, yeah, we've not missed one. And you'd have to try very hard not to miss, to miss a mock convention. Yeah, it is and one of the big differences as time has gone on is the fact that the mock convention activity begins a year ahead. We have speakers who come in to the campus not in the mock convention year, but the year before that. So the convention does a good job, I think, in making political education a part of its objective.
What changes have you seen over the years? I mean, obviously, is more money going into it? Obviously, there's technical.
Well, like everything, it costs. I think the people who are the mock conventioneers are doing more, so what they're doing is more expensive. Beyond that, there's just the general increase in the cost of living. Yes, I think the mock convention has become a more elaborate, expensive undertaking, but so it has also been successful in financing itself.
Do you know the speakers that come, have they always been compensated over the years, or I'm just wondering if...
I would say no, not all. And I really don't know the answer to your question, but I think that was rather uncommon, again, going back to the end of the Second World War, when this thing began to be a more accurate reflection of the convention. So there probably has been an uptick in paying speakers, but I'm really not sure.
What are some of your favorite moments over the years?
With the mock convention?
Yes.
Well, I think there's just nothing that beats sitting there in that crowd and forming your own preferences with respect to the people who are about to be either shunted aside or nominated, one or the other. The students, for people who are not students, are very entertaining, and they put on a good show. The mock convention parade is a wonderful American depiction of political activity, and the floats, which are state floats, are some of them extremely clever, and that's a lot of fun. I think that there is a lot of pleasure that you derive too from the mock convention in the faculty, our permanent faculty, talking more about what they're doing as part of the convention. It is absolutely a student convention, but that's not to say that the students are so unwise to seek advice and counsel from the faculty. Of course they do, and it's good. It's a lot of fun to see that aspect develop.
Bruce, can you think of anything?
No, I'm just saying. So you've been to most of them since you came in '63.
Yeah.
So you've been 64, 68. Well, just about anything.
Well, yeah. My first one was when I was a student in '56, right. And then you got them every 4 years.
Some of the later ones, it's hard to beat Alvin Barkley.
Yeah. Thank goodness.
I know, because Lou John did not know this. In the 1968 convention, did the 60s really touch WNL? Were there hippies?
Oh yeah. No, well, sort of. a la Washington and Lee. It's, our hippiness, if you tried to compare it to some other places, would be pretty pale, pretty mild. But yeah, we did. We had the purple undershirts and crazy hair and all. Of course, we were still all male then, and so all the men were wearing their hair low, and we had some earrings and stuff like that. But on a scale of 1 to 10 compared to some other places, we'd probably be no higher than about a 5 in my opinion.
So there was no, that convention year, I know the rest of the country, there was a lot of unrest, really.
There was no unrest with the convention itself. No, we had students during that period who were trying to organize. We had a couple of sit-ins. I think one of the most amusing stories coming out of that period was there were 2 factions, students, and I don't think anyone really believed there was going to be any violence. But one night, the doorbell at the Lee House rang. You may have heard this. And Mrs. Huntley came to the door, and it was one of the members of one of the groups, and I don't remember exactly what group that was, who said, "Miss Huntley, I just want you to know that in case there's any trouble tonight, that we're going to spend the evening on your front porch to be sure that nothing happens to the Lee House." And Evelyn, who had a wonderful, bright sense of humor, said, "Well, if you're going to do that, if it frosts, will you bring in the geraniums?" So that was just priceless. But we went through that period. I mean, our students didn't want to take exams. They wanted to be able to leave the campus without having taken their exams and go to Washington to work with whomever, you know, congressmen or agitators or whatever. But it was within, at least I thought ours was within bounds.
What was the most interesting political moment in the mock conventions?
Well, I think it's as is the case with the real conventions, I think it's after you get over the first ballot, or maybe even the second, although lately our conventions have wound up pretty quickly. Second ballot pretty well did it. But it used to be that there would be, you know, maybe 3 or 4. And when you see states that are jockeying for position, so to speak, because the thing to remember about the intent of the convention is that it isn't just, as I said earlier, a straw poll. It's supposed to be an accurate reflection of what the real people, the real delegates would be doing. So if you're, let's say, the South Carolina delegate and the first ballot goes through and you're not supposed to make up your mind how to cast your second ballot without first calling down to South Carolina and saying, okay, this is what happened on the first ballot. What do you think should happen on the second? So again, it tries to be as real as it can be. And it's very interesting to see that process working out.
It's got to be an education you can't get anywhere else.
Yeah, there are other mock conventions, I think. I just don't think any of them are as accurate and as purposeful as ours. We're kind of the granddaddy of them all, and we've been so successful. We have been covered by all sorts of national press. I mean, we're taken seriously. And when whoever it is who's nominated is told they are on the phone, you know, over the loudspeaker and whatnot, and then the caliber of national politicians who come to be keynoters and other participants in the convention is a very distinguished senior group of people. I mean, who knows what who it'll be this next convention, but you can think right away of all sorts of people who will be asked, at least, and most of them are more than happy to come. I think they have a good time.
I really enjoy the carnival.
Yeah.
This last convention, it was carnival and culture.
Yeah. Well, this next convention, of course, will be a Republican convention, and but there's just a whole slew of Republicans who we know, and you know, who I'm sure be included in the convention one way or the other.
Is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I think the convention is, along with the honor system and with our speaking tradition and other characteristics that we have of civility, and is one of Washington Lee's hallmarks. And I just hope it continues.
Thank you very much.
You're more than welcome.